Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we'd watch were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket dragon, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
At this time this morning, I'd like to start the program off with our Congressman. Congressman Stephen Lynch is no stranger to this district, but he serves on the Committee on Financial Services. He's a ranking Democrat Subcommittee on Digital Assets, Financial Technology, and Artificial Intelligence, Subcommittee on Capital Markets, Subcommittee on Financial Institutions, Committee on Oversight and Government Relation and Reform, Subcommittee on Delivering on Government Efficiency, and Subcommittee on Military and Foreign Affairs. I'll just make two comments about this gentleman. One is, you would think he lived in Quincy. He's in the district all the time. He's on the phone frequently checking in and seeing how he can help in any way as we go through the challenges we're facing as a society. Secondly, his service on the Subcommittee on Military and Foreign Affairs, he has traveled around the world, I'd say at least a couple of dozen times visiting our troops. And he's always looking for the kids from Quincy in his district to say hello. So please join me in welcoming our Congressman Stephen Lynch.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Mayor Koch, my friend, for the kind introduction and for your relentless loyalty to the history of the city of Quincy. Reverend clergy, Reverend Delaney and Reverend Pulsini, my colleagues in government, both members of the City Council and City Councilors-elect, members of the School Committee and School Committee-elect. It is a wonderful opportunity for me to be here with you. I know oftentimes people say they're honored to be somewhere, and but truly, I'm honored to be here and to play a small part in this ceremony. Mayor Koch, thank you so much for, again, your relentless loyalty to the history of Quincy and the retelling of the stories of the lives of those intrepid souls who played such an outsized role in the shaping of our nation. And more recently, the stories of those military generals who demonstrated such enormous sagacity and courage in defending our freedoms. I have the honor of being a member of the National Adams Memorial Commission, and we have been tasked with the establishment of a suitable memorial along the Mall in Washington, D.C. to honor the Adams family. Much of the most difficult challenge in that task was, over the years, finding a suitable location, which we have at long last agreed upon. And earlier this year, I became an original co-sponsor of the Great American Heroes Act, which would extend the authorization to build the Adams Memorial until 2032 in President's Park in the District of Columbia, just a short distance from the White House, to properly commemorate the contributions made by the Adams family to our nation. And I look forward to seeing the Adams Memorial built in Washington, D.C. to serve as a proper tribute, just as you have done here in Quincy. Mayor Koch, thank you for inspiring this tribute to the extraordinary life of John Quincy Adams and directing the dedication of this park and statue in his honor. I realize that there are speakers yet to come, Dr. Edward Fitzgerald, who's the executive director of the Quincy Historical Society, and Professor Randall Woods from the University of Arkansas, who will come here to the microphone and are better qualified and better able to recount the narrative of John Quincy Adams' place in history. So I will leave that respectfully to them. And to be perfectly honest, I did not come here to speak, but to listen, because I so look forward with great anticipation to the telling. I suppose part of that comes from the fact that I enjoy the honor to occupy the same House seat that John Quincy Adams once held. And I serve in our national legislature, whose rules were written by his father, John Adams, for our great and general court here in Massachusetts, and which were later adopted by the United States Congress. Those House rules that are largely in effect to this day. And the fact that we shared that sublime moment, albeit separated by 200 years, when we each placed our hands upon a Bible and solemnly pledged to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, and in its modern version, to defend it against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and to bear true faith and allegiance to that Constitution without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and to well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office, so help me God. So knowing the challenges of his time, which were momentous, indeed were profound in their shaping effect for our young nation. I mean, think about it. John Quincy Adams confronted slavery, dear God, at a time when very few leaders had the courage to do so. He defended the crew of the Amistad. He was heroic. And in doing so, he gave life to some of our nation's enduring ideals, which unalterably guided our nation. So because of my position, I humbly share a narrow window into the weight and the depth of the responsibility he must have felt when he recited that oath of office, which makes his story for me that much more awe-inspiring. In closing, for the people of Quincy, this isn't just John Quincy Adams' story. This is very much your story. John Quincy Adams' life reminds us that our greatest leaders are not defined by their time in office, but by the values they absorb and then carry with them from the very beginning of their service. The city of Quincy was not just John Quincy Adams' birthplace, it was the very foundation of his character. And this community helped shape him into one of the most principled and accomplished public servants in American history. This park and this statue will hopefully serve as an inspiration to future generations in this city of Quincy, as well as serve as a true testament to John Quincy Adams' remarkable life and the impact of the moral force of his legacy. Lastly, it remains a great honor for me to represent the families of this city of presidents in the United States Congress. Mr. Mayor, thank you so much again for everything you have done and for including me in today's program. May God bless the city of Quincy, and may he continue to bless these United States of America. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. You do us proud. I'd like to acknowledge some of my colleagues here in government, our elected officials who have joined us this morning. Before I do that, I want to publicly thank the Quincy City Council members for their partnership and support of this project, like the projects before, just down the street at Hancock Commons, where today we're setting up for the Christmas festivities about to come. I know this morning we have with us the City Councilor Noel DeBona, City Councilor Scott Campbell, Ward 4 Councilor Jim Devine. Get all the councilors. I know we have school committee member Emily Lebo, Senator John Keenan, a former city councilor, District Attorney Mike Morrissey, Clerk of Courts Walter Timilty, County Commissioner Joe Shea, Councilor-elect Dan Mahoney, Councilor-elect David Jacobs. Did I miss anybody? Wave your hand if I missed you. Oh, Treasurer Mike Bellotti. How could I miss him? I know the congressman alluded to the commission in Washington, D.C. The congressman asked me for an appointment to that commission, and a landscape architect who designed this park, Richard Houghton, is here with us, and we appreciate your service on the commission. And joining us from Washington is Jennifer Fay, who is working with the commission to raise some of the necessary funding that will match some of the federal funding to ultimately build a beautiful monument in DC to this Adams family. I also want to acknowledge the executive director of the Adams Presidential Center, who's with us here today, Kurt Graham, the former director of the Truman Library. We're thrilled to have him with us as well. I'll have a few more introductions later. Just for housekeeping purposes, there's sets of doors on this side of the tent, and there is a restroom facility right out here, should you need one. Our keynote speaker this morning certainly is no stranger to Quincy people, Dr. Ed Fitzgerald. He's married to Norma Fitzgerald for 42 years, proud father of Peter Fitzgerald, who lives in Brooklyn, New York. Ed grew up in Bristol, Rhode Island, making frequent visits to Quincy to stay with his aunt. He remembers eating at the lunch counter at the Howard Johnson's that was located at the ground floor of the Granite Trust building as a child. Ed is actually fourth generation Quincy on his mother's side. After attending Brown University for his undergrad degree, Ed received his doctorate in English and American Literature from New York University in 1985. He worked in the publishing industry in New York for a number of years and taught English at Rutgers University and Queensborough Community College. He returned to Quincy in 1990, and through a distant familial connection with Gene Creedon, you might remember that name, former superintendent of schools here, Ed was introduced to the Quincy Historical Society and recommended for the position of executive director, which he accepted in 1992, and has served in that position for 33 years. He's overseen a number of projects as director. He has been involved in the publication of 4 books with the Society. He's conducted independent research projects and given presentations on every topic you can imagine that relates to Quincy. And he served as an adjunct professor at Quincy College for a number of years, back in 2000 to 2005. He's been a historical consultant for the city of Quincy and a host of public works projects, including the Hancock Adams Common, anything Quincy. Anytime I have a question about anything in history, he's the go-to guy, always picks up the phone, and always has the right answer. Please join me in welcoming a Quincy gem, Ed Fitzgerald.
Quincy gem? Oh, okay. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you. And thank you very much for inviting me to do this. It's an honor to do this at the dedication of this marvelous statue and park, and to do this in the 200th anniversary year of the first year of John Quincy Adams's presidency. Before I start, I reference a couple of names of scholars in what I'm going to say, but I do want to acknowledge some people whose work I'm really sort of plundering here. that I don't get mentioned by name. Andrew Oliver, who was back in the early days of the Adams papers. Fred Kaplan, who wrote some of the most interesting biographies lately. And the work that my colleague and successor as executive director, Alexandra Elliott, did in the early stages of research as the work began on this statue and this park. I will also ask your indulgence if there are some rough edges around the corners here. This talk could either be called Thoughts About John Quincy Adams, because I'm going to kind of roam around, or if we're going to give it some bit more of a focus, I would call it the John Quincy Adams Revival. To start with, I'd ask you to think about the idea of historic figures from the past speaking to us, speaking, of course, figuratively. And by that I mean that what they say, what we learn about them somehow connects with us. We respond to it. We understand it. We feel somehow that we know these people. John Quincy Adams was always admired. He was never anything less than admired. But for much of the 20th century, he did not speak to the American public. The public did not find anything resonant in him. But in recent decades, he has begun to speak to us again. It's the past 40 years or so, a little later and for different reasons than the John Adams Revival. So why now, or why in this period of time? I think in part it's because of the times. After the Civil Rights Movement, and which prompted a reassessment of all the 19th century theories about slavery and how it was handled, JQA began to look a heck of a lot better. And in fact, the earliest parts of the John Quincy Adams Revival were focusing on his congressional years. Then the end of the Cold War, the release from the us versus them template that we had lived in for, close to 50 years, gave us a chance to renew our thinking about America's place in the world. And his work on the Monroe Doctrine began to seem more interesting. And then more generally, people have just begun to think about the American Republic. Finally, there's the man himself. To call John Quincy Adams one of the most complex figures in American history is an understatement. To call him remarkable is equally an understatement. His career is, in the true sense of the word, unique, and it's matched by his character and personality. There's a stereotype of him, brilliant but cold, but it's more than that. There's a mystery about him, not in the sinister sense, but a little bit the way that there's a mystery about Lincoln. You never feel that you've gotten to all his depths. There's a sense that there's something important you never quite know. So how does John Quincy Adams speak to us? And what does he speak to us about? And how does he stack up with how does this stack up with how his contemporaries saw him? In terms of accomplishments, Adams' clearest and greatest achievements came during his years as diplomatic. The Treaty of Ghent ends the War of 1812 without any concessions made by America. As Secretary of State, he settles the US-Canadian border. He acquires Florida from Spain, and in the same treaty extends these borders of the Louisiana Purchase westward and northward, so that for the first time, US territory reaches the Pacific Ocean. And then, of course, in the final years of his secretaryship, he frames what comes to be known as the Monroe Doctrine. After that, though, things get a bit more problematic. Nobody now is going to call his presidency a success. In Congress, he works ably at regular business, but his profile is as a dissenter. And that gets us to a key insight, I think, that I want about John Quincy Adams that I find best expressed by Ralph Waldo Emerson, the great 19th century writer and his contemporary. In 1843, Emerson writes in his journal, Mr. Adams chose wisely and according to his constitution when on leaving the presidency, he went into Congress. He is no literary old gentleman, but a bruiser and loves the melee. When they talk about his age and venerableness and nearness to the grave, he knows better. He is an old roue who cannot live on slops but must have sulfuric acid in his tea. And he's right. Adams was a bruiser. Adams is essentially a counterpuncher. He is possibly the greatest counterpuncher in American political history. All his greatest achievements come when he can stand alone against an opposition. He waits out the British at Ghent. When everybody else wants to throw Andrew Jackson under the 19th century bus for the killings in Florida, he says no and winds up getting Florida and getting the extension of the Louisiana Purchase. When everybody else in the cabinet wants to go along and sign on to England's agreement with the about interference in the New World, he says no, we should do our own, and he convinces everybody else, and the Monroe Doctrine comes into existence. And so on. Excuse me. As a congressman, everything, as I said before, there is routine work that he does ably, as I'm sure the congressman knows what that's like. But what he's known for is fighting against bucking the trend. Emerson later, about a year later, made another somewhat less ironic observation about Adams. And this is after Adams has finally gotten the defeat of the gag rule. The first comment is when Adams is really kicking it up in Congress and really giving satiric hell to the Southerners. Now he's gotten the gag rule defeated finally. And this is what Emerson says in his journal that year. Our people are slow to learn the wisdom of sending character instead of talent to Congress. Again and again, they have sent a man of great astuteness, a fine scholar, a fine forensic orator, and some master of the brawls has crunched him up and has had his bit like a bit of paper. At last, they sent a man with a backbone, and he defied the whole Southern delegation when they attempted to smother him, and they conquered him. Mr. Adams is a man of great powers, but chiefly he is a sincere man, not a man of the moment and of a single measure. And besides the success or failure of the measure, there remains to him the respect of all men for his earnestness. This is the kind of depiction of Adams that the John Quincy Adams revival is most engaged by. A man of great powers, but chiefly a sincere man and not a man of the moment and of a single measure. This is a man, and back to narration, this is a man who sees further and works toward greater goals. It echoes a perception about Adams expressed by Samuel Eliot Morison, the great Samuel Eliot Morison 60 years ago. Adams' perception was abnormally keen, and he alone of contemporaries in either hemisphere foresaw America's future place in the world. Stated most explicitly by Charles Adele, who described it as, quote, a grand strategy for the Republic, but in one degree or another shared by most of the recent historians, this interpretation sees Adams playing a long game. He sees America's potential on the world stage and realizes that that potential can also threaten our Republican form of government and our freedom, which he realizes and greatly values. So the Monroe Doctrine is both a hard-nosed power play and a guarantee of our Republic and our freedom. He recognizes that the necessary compromises made with slavery in the Constitution pose a potentially fatal political and moral threat to the Republic. So he begins to seek a way to counteract them. He does this, of course, through presenting petitions and through his speeches and writing. He does so through language. Because he does so through language, the weapons are philosophical and literary, but that does not make them any the less real. And he's really pretty good at it. He is not a great stylist, but he's a powerful writer, and he's a master of rhetorical strategy. Hang on, because I'm about to channel my inner English teacher here, so we're going to go into the text for a while. Time and again, his speeches move slowly in ornate language fashionable at the time, risking boredom, but actually laying groundwork. Then as we seem to be approaching the end, there's a quiet pivot, and there's a burst of a brilliant new idea. We see this when he's president in his first message to Congress, what we now call the State of the Union. He goes through the laundry list of mundane things, then says, Now, upon this first occasion of addressing the Congress, he feels he really ought to say something about internal improvements. The next sentence is, "The great object of the institution of civil government is the improvement of the condition of those who are parties to the social compact, and no government in whatever form constituted can accomplish the lawful ends of its institution, but in proportion as improves the condition of those over whom it is established." Still a little long-winded, but he got their attention, and 2 paragraphs later, he hits them, "Liberty is power." This kind of surprise strategy is more effectively and more subtly used to greater purpose in his 4th of July orations. This takes a little explaining, and I want to spend a little bit of time here because I think this is really kind of important. It's an accidental series. It stretches over 40 years. And what they are is what they say they are. They're the lectures he gives on the 4th of July for occasions, patriotic occasions. There's no way he can plan what he's going to do, but taken together, they form a coherent whole. They just bring themselves together. By the end, of course, he knows where he's going because he knows where he's been. But when he starts out, he doesn't. And they are part of a broader effort to put the Declaration at the center of American identity, which it was not in the early 19th century. It would make it not only the founding document, but the foundational document of the nature of our identity as a nation and of our ideals as a nation. So I want to spend a little time just watching how these move because it's elegant. Each also serves as a commentary on a contemporary issue. The first and shortest, in Boston in 1793, considers the Declaration as inspiration to the rest of the world, particularly to Europe, and hopes for the best from the French Revolution. The second, is where it begins to get a little more substantial, was given in Washington in 1821 while the Monroe Doctrine was in the works, so when he's Secretary of State. And it contains a double whammy. There's a long, "it's not this" lead-in, the rhetorical device. It wasn't this, it wasn't that, it wasn't this, wasn't that either. Where he keeps repeating that it's not enumeration of grievances, it's not the tyranny charge, it's not even the act of separation from Britain, that is the essential act. Just when that structure seems to be at the breaking point, he says, "It is the principle which it proclaims. It was the first solemn declaration by a nation of the only legitimate foundation of civil government. It was the cornerstone of a new fabric, destined to cover the surface of the globe. It demolished at a stroke the lawfulness of all governments founded upon conquest. It swept away all the rubbish of accumulated centuries of servitude. It announced in practical form to the world the transcendent truth of the unalienable sovereignty of the people." So we know what he's talking about. He's talking about that key phrase, which we now all see as the center of the Declaration of Independence, the one that begins, "We hold these truths to be self-evident." But they hadn't in 1838, when was this, 1830, where are we, 1821, I knew we would find it. And he's not doing this alone. There are many other people in the country doing this, but he is a key person in moving this. And this is important because it establishes the foundation as being a foundation of rights and a foundation of sovereignty of the people. But he's not done in this speech. He goes on to consider the international scene and events in Europe and independence movements in Central and South America. And at that point, he makes what is his best reasoned case for his vision of America's role in the world in probably his single most eloquent passage, which I'm going to indulge and read at length. "Wherever the standard of freedom and independence has been or shall be unfurled, there will her heart, her benedictions, and her prayers be. But she goes not abroad in search of monsters to destroy. She is the well-wisher to the freedom and independence of all. She is the champion and vindicator only of her own. She will recommend the general cause by countenance of her voice and the benignant sympathy of her example. She well knows that by once enlisting under other banners than her own, even the banners of foreign independence, she would involve herself beyond power of extrication in all the wars of interest and intrigue, of individual avarice, envy, and ambition. which assumed the colors and usurped the standard of freedom. The fundamental maxims of her policy would insensibly change from liberty to force. She might become the dictators of the world. She would no longer be the ruler of her own spirit. The third edition was given in 1831, right here in Quincy, probably a few yards from where we are right now. And it is actually the most philosophically complex, and I will spare you a quote from it. He builds on that, by this time he knows where he's going. I actually looked at the diary entries about this. He agonizes about this for a month. And he's going back and forth, and he's going, do I dare do this? Do I really want to do this? And he finally says, yeah, I'm going to do it. Adams built, and he's building on what he's already done in the previous two. He builds on the idea of the sovereignty of the people introduced in that second speech, to argue that America declared independence as a sovereign people, not as a group of colonies. So national unity dates from the Declaration. He then uses this to go after South Carolina's current assertion of a right to nullify federal laws. Adams argues that nullification is insurrectionary, a prelude to civil war, and is actually not freedom, but tyranny. The immediate issue in 1831 is tariffs, but slavery, of course, lurks right around the corner. And in the fourth oration given in Newburyport in 1837, Adams deals with slavery directly and argues that slavery violates the principles of the Declaration. Our mention of slavery brings us to another point. In all of this, it's not like Adams is working from some great fixed, worked out position that he's had from the day he graduated from Harvard. His views on issues are evolving. For instance, Adams began by sharing his father's and many of the founding generation's distrust of democracy. But his perceptions changed and were changing. In a different use of eloquence from what we have seen, his presidential inaugural address is the best inaugural address since Jefferson's and probably the best until Lincoln's. Pardon me. Well aware of the difficult circumstances of his election, Adams makes an elegant statement, not of confrontation, but of conciliation. He does this by reviewing and affirming our history and our institutions. And in that affirmation, he reaches a point where he becomes the first president to refer in public to our system as a representative democracy. He's also the first president to have his presidential portrait taken with regular pants and not those silly things the guys wore in the 18th century. So Republican virtue there as well. He makes a similar journey regarding slavery. Always aware that it is a moral stain, he concentrates initially on it as a political problem. But his focus on the Declaration, on those principles that he's been pulling out of the Declaration and making central, that comes into play here. And the moral dimension increasingly comes to the fore. Almost alone among mainstream opponents of slavery, he emphasizes slavery as a violation of human rights, not just a political problem. The underlying evil of the slave trade, he notes, is the existence of slavery itself. So why are we arguing about the slave trade? Let's get rid of slavery. War is a perpetual violation, he says, war is one more time. He says, war is a perpetual violation of the rights of human beings to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And slavery is no more than the base-born progeny of war. Most famously, in his defense of the Amistad Africans, he makes his finest use of his delayed spring strategy, holding it back and holding it back. After intricate legal argument, much of it improvised, lasting over 3 hours, he shifts and says, the moment you come to the Declaration of Independence, that every man has a right to life and liberty, an inalienable right, this case is decided. So, old man eloquent. What were the practical effects at the time? The Supreme Court did, of course, fine for the Africans, and Adams did succeed in eliminating the gag rule. But the effort was really to change opinions, minds, consciousness, and that, of course, is harder to measure. Daniel Walker Howe, among other contemporary scholars, believes Adams' ideas did influence and come to fruition under Abraham Lincoln. And why and how does Adams speak to us? As another contemporary scholar points out, David Waldstreicher, he points out the great issues, the great problems on which he spoke are still with us. He says, they resonate strongly today, leading to what can only be called an Adams revival. His questions are, again, ours. I'd also like to add one more thing from Waldstreicher. This is from a different passage, but I was struck by something Waldstreicher said in an introduction to a ceremonial speech that Adams gave when he was having a particularly tough time in his presidency. The speech, Waldstreicher says, quote, afforded him a chance to escape the gloom of politics and reconnect with the optimism that was central to his character. And I think I tend to forget that. I don't know whether other people tend to forget it too, but I see the brawler, I see the fighter, but he also was a man of belief and a man of hope. And maybe we also read him for the hope. I do want to turn briefly to his personal life because I raised it earlier, because it is so striking. It occupies, you don't think of, if you know anything about John Quincy Adams, you don't think of him without thinking about his personal life and the many ways and the many terrible things that happened in that life. But I think we still treat the private and the public lives here on parallel tracks. We don't seem to be able to get them together. And I really don't have an answer to that, or I'm not going to propose anything. We have finally given Louisa Catherine her due in the last 10 or 15 years. But the marriage remains one of those areas, at least to me, and I'd be happy to hear if somebody knows differently, that remains one of those areas of mystery that I was kind of referring to at the beginning. We, or at least I, have been inclined to see it as tragic, but my colleague Alexandra Elliott has pointed out to me that there's also evidence that it was a relationship of love. Similarly, with the brilliant but cold stereotype, coldness is Adams' self-description, and all the explanations of it from the biography seem necessary but not sufficient reasons. And there are significant instances of Adams not being cold. This is all material for another time. I just say that the writer who can integrate the private and public Adams will make the next great contribution to our understanding. And it's possible that Professor Wood has done that given the title of his book, but I have yet to get a chance to read that, so he might have been able to solve it for him. Adams, as we know, was a pretty good poet. And my hunch is that the answer may lie somewhere in the intersection of biography, morality, politics, and art. And that brings me to what this really is my final point, and gets us back to the reason why we're here today. Among the people with whom Adams was not always cold were artists. For a man of forbidding manners, or supposedly forbidding manners, he was always willing to agree to an artist's request to take his portrait or mold his bust. I mean, he just never said no. There are 60 portraits of Adams, a whole bunch of busts and a bunch of photographs. And he often got along pretty well with the artist and could even be quite chatty with him. George Healey painted Adams when Healey was 32 and Adams was 78. Healey said Adams' conversation was, quote, most varied and interesting, so much so that at the time I took a few notes after each sitting. John Quincy Adams was a most courteous gentleman. Healey at one point asked if Adams didn't at times look upon the artist as so many horseflies, the way Daniel Webster did. Adams replied, no, sir. I must say that some of my pleasantest hours have been spent in sitting for artists. There are, of course, some dull men in your profession, but among my most agreeable acquaintances, I count several painters. Adams also had a good relationship with the sculptor Hiram Powers, who did the bust of Adams that is now in First Parish Church. Adams composed a poem, a sonnet, based on sitting for Powers. And I want to close by reading that because it's appropriate to this occasion, but also because I have a sense that there's something important hiding in there somewhere. I can't quite get it. I sense it, but I can't articulate it. Adams in the poem also sends out a challenge to Powers and by extension to all artists. And I think if you've been over to the park or if you're going to go over to the park, you'll see that Sergei has more than met Mr. Adams's challenge. So here's the poem. To Hiram Powers, sculptor, thy hand has molded into form the haggard features of a toil-worn face, and whosoever views thy work shall trace an age of sorrow and a life of storm? And canst thou mold the heart, for that is warm, glowing with tenderness for all our race, instinct with all the sympathies that grace the pure and artless bosom where they swarm. Artist, may fortune smile upon thy hand, go forth and rival Greece's art sublime. Return and bid the statesmen of thy land live in thy marble through after all time. O snatch the fire from heaven that Prometheus stole, and give the breathless block a breathing soul. Thank you.
Terrific, Doctor. See, he is a Quincy Jim. Thanks, Doc. If you can bear with me, I would like to acknowledge the people involved in this program, this project, this beautiful park. Before I do that, I do want to acknowledge my beautiful wife, First Lady of Quincy, Christine. The project team for the park, it's pretty remarkable because the various companies, and these projects get bid, public process, a bunch of Quincy kids that started their own companies. It said that the small business is the backbone of our economy, and we have a number of them right here in Quincy. So I'd like to start with Granite City Partners. Joe Shea grew up in West Quincy, and his partner Olivia Von Don Betkin, who's a resident of Quincy and raising her child here. So to Joe and Olivia for your work on project management. MJ Nichols Landscaping won the bid for the landscaping and hardscape. MJ Nichols was started by Matt Nichols, a West Quincy kid. His project manager is Mike Naughton, a North Quincy kid, who's here. I think Mike Naughton's here. Say hello. That was actually an altar boy with his father at Sacred Heart. We then have Halverson Tie and Bond Studio, and I mentioned already Richard Pohoten being part of the commission in DC, but Richard was the lead architect on this project, on Abigail, on Hancock Adams Common, and of course the General's Park. Very gifted Quincy kid. Thank you, Richard. Fulsham Corp, John Fulsham grew up in North Quincy. He's a West Quincy kid now. He did much of the cement and concrete work, and another great Quincy kid. Thank you, John Fulsham. The ironwork, the beautiful ironwork you see over there with the wrought iron, was done by Matt Logan. How's that kid? LLIW Metal Fabrication. We thank Matt for his work. And we appreciate the other vendors involved, Sanibel Electric, Structural Stone, and US Art for their work as well. I do want to also acknowledge the event committee here today, who I am so blessed as a mayor, one, to serve as the mayor, but also to work with some incredible public servants who love this city as much as you and I do. So I want to thank the event committee. Again, Olivia Alexander Elliott, who's now the director of the Historical Society, who succeeded Ed Fitzgerald. It's been part of the committee. Erin Glennon, Paul Hines, Pat McCarthy, David Murphy, Helen Murphy, Karen O'Toole, Joseph Shea, Chris Walker, and Lisa Omola. Let's hear it for the event committee. And we're on the grounds of Quincy Mutual Group, which is the oldest business in Quincy, well over 150 years. And we have Doug and Steve Briggs here. They're hosting us on their property this morning. Thank you, Doug and Steve. I'd like to invite up our sculptor, Sergei. Sergei, you can read the program, his bio. We came to know Sergei a number of years ago when he was one of the finalists for the Adams and Hancock statues. We met at the Adams Academy. We had a committee. It was 78 responded to the RFP from the city, request for proposals. 78 from all across the country, 2 foreign countries. And that was the attraction of Hancock and Adams. All the way down, Sergei was chosen. He's done John Hancock, John Adams, Abigail Adams, the generals, and now, of course, John Quincy Adams. And I gotta believe, Sergei, that John Quincy Adams was probably a little bit easier than his father and mother because he was the first president to be photographed. There are lots of photographs of John Quincy Adams, which I think helped him in his work. But we are so blessed to have Sergei here, and I'm gonna have him, we're gonna have the Congressman, Dr. Ed, come up to present the maquette of the statue. Don't worry about that. I hold those up so people can see that. Thank you.
Ready?
Sure.
Okay, 1, 2.